Hello, and thank you for joining me for this video. Today we're looking at Derwent's Inktense products. Inktense is a wax-based watercolor type product from Derwent. You might know them from their watercolor pencils. Derwent uses a proprietary formula that allows an ink product to behave almost like a watercolor product. So Inktense is water soluble, but unlike watercolor, it dries to an almost permanent state. So depending on the type of paper you use, you might get better ink permanence, you might get better blending, a smoother texture. I have an upcoming video on the subject of the paper that you use with these products. It was just too much for this video. So I have the set of 72 pencils, the set of 36 blocks, and the set of 24 pan paints. So the purpose of this video today is to show you some of the ways that I use these products in my card making and to demonstrate some of the techniques I use with different types of paper. I have some swatch cards here. I made a set for each of the products, and I highly recommend that you create swatch cards for your Inktense products. It helps you to get a feel for how these ink products interact with water, how they look and feel on your preferred paper. I'm using 140-pound cold pressed watercolor paper here for each of my swatch sets, so I can really easily compare how a particular color looks in each of the three products on my preferred paper. And this is really important because they do behave very differently on different types of paper. So I will start with the blocks. These are numbered, and the numbers correspond with the other products. So 100 sherbet lemon is 100 sherbet lemon in the other sets as well. It also comes with a white block. This is antique white, and this is an opaque color. You can use this to create lighter tones of the other ink colors, and because it's opaque, you can use it on dry ink, so that's really nice to have. I swatch these in the same order that they appear in my tin. I have an artist friend who arranges hers in a warm color versus cool color configuration. That's how she uses hers. Do what works best for you. These blocks have the feel of like a pastel, but on paper they act very much like a watercolor or a watercolor pencil. So here's my typical setup when I'm working with any of these Inktense products. I have a 4-well palette, a jar of clean water for rinsing my brush and an assortment of brushes, a paper towel or a microfiber cloth, and some small pieces of watercolor paper. These are for swatching, just for checking color as I'm working. I'm going to start by swatching one of these blocks. I'll get some clean water on my brush, and I'm going to swatch this turquoise block. When I'm working directly from brush to block, I like to pick up the ink from the end of the block. These blocks break very easily. I know lots of artists like to work with very small pieces. I kind of like them whole. So the paper that I am swatching on is cold pressed watercolor paper. It's 100% cotton. And I want to show you the range of color that you can get from these inks. The inks are very highly pigmented. And in their pure form, without any water, they're very intense. And as you add water, it becomes lighter and more transparent. I'm going to create a quick sketch here of a leaf. I'm going to just freehand this on cold pressed watercolor paper, and I'm using 4 colors of ink blocks: chili red, leaf green, baked earth, and willow. And I'm going direct to paper. So I will apply the ink mostly in a single layer. There might be a little bit of overlap here for shading. And then I will activate the ink with water. It's important to remember with the blocks, actually with all of these products, that the ink is not permanent until it has been activated with water. So once I have my first layer of ink down, I'll go back over the entire drawing with my paintbrush and some clean water in each of the different areas. Once this is dry, I can go back and I can add a second or third layer of ink. While my ink is still wet here, I'm just drawing in some veins of the leaves with a little ball stylus. Here's another way that I like to use these Inktense blocks, and this is actually the primary reason why I bought this product. Sometimes when I'm card making, I find that I need a paste color that I don't have in my stash. This particular sample was created using Nuvo paste and a violet red Inktense block. For one of the cards that I'm making today, I need 3 colors of paste that I don't currently have. It's a Mardi Gras card using this green, yellow, and purple color scheme. So I'm going to make those colors using Winter White Nuvo paste and 3 Inktense blocks colors. I'll show you how I make the Sun Yellow Nuvo paste, but I followed the exact same process for the other 2 colors. This requires you to make a pretty good estimate of the amount of paste you're going to need for your project so that you don't waste. But the process is very simple. I take the Inktense block and a craft knife, and I simply shave a small amount of the block onto a cutting board, and then I use a craft spatula to mix the ink and the paste until the color is even. You have to do this fairly quickly because the paste will dry quickly. Be sure to shave the ink into a fine powder so that it mixes more easily with the paste. For my Mardi Gras card, I am using a stencil from Gina K. It's called Fizzy. And I'm applying this paste to a layering weight white cardstock. So I'll tape down my stencil, which is a 6x6 stencil, and then I'll apply the Nuvo paste to approximately 1/3 of the stencil. I'll do this in 3 stages, 1 for each of the colors. So once I have removed the stencil, I will let this panel dry, and then I'll go back and mix up my 2nd and my 3rd colors and complete the panel. So here's a look at the pencil set. It is a 72 pencil set, comes in 2 layers. And for this set, I created very large swatch cards. I used these pencils more than the other 2 products, and I wanted lots of white space around my colors on my swatch cards so I could see the colors easily, and also to be able to make comparisons between the same colors in the other 2 sets. So the nice thing about this set is that it also comes with an outliner pencil that you can use to create sketches. It is not water soluble, so you can maintain a really nice outline to your sketches when you're using water. It also comes with this antique white pencil. Again, this is opaque, and you can create lighter tones with this pencil using the other colors. You can also layer over dry ink. I didn't want to forget to talk about this. This is a watercolor coloring book from Alta New. The wild rose image that I'm using for one of the cards comes from this book. It's a really nice watercolor coloring book. The images are printed on 140-pound cold press watercolor paper that is 100% cotton. It's the paper that many watercolorists prefer. The images are beautiful. There are 2 versions of each image. One has a darker outline, one has a lighter outline. I highly, highly recommend that you pick this up if you love to watercolor floral images. So here is the watercolor image that I'm using for today's card. I've been working on this for quite a while, and I always write down the colors that I'm using on the back because I don't always finish these in one sitting. So I'm nearly finished with this panel. I'm adding a little bit of color to the edges of the petals, and I'm going direct to paper with the watercolor pencil, and then I'm using a very fine watercolor brush. I think this one is a liner brush or a 000 to activate the ink and pull some of the color down into the petals. So I can control the intensity of color 3 ways: by the amount of ink that I'm actually putting on my page, by the amount of water that is on my brush, and then also by layering color. Once this panel is dry, I can go back and layer additional colors on top. Here's my finished panel. I love the vibrant colors that you can get from these pencils, and this is primarily 1 layer of paint. So I'll show you a very quick and easy method to make a background panel for your cards. I'm just laying down a very light layer of Inktense pencil here, and I am going back over the entire image with a very wet, little bit larger brush, lighter area into darker area. You can, once this first layer is dry, you can go back and add a little bit more pencil and kind of glaze or add another layer. This isn't my preferred method of doing it. I do think it looks a little bit grainier, but it is a really nice way to create a really quick background. Okay, moving on to the paint pans. This is a 24 color set. It comes with this little vellum swatch card. It's nice to have, but I think you can't go wrong with creating your own swatch card with nice gradients. It also comes with this water brush pen. It's a really nice water brush. I've used this a few times. It also comes with a sponge, and you can use this to wipe your brush between colors or when you're blending. But you can see here on this swatch card to the right how well these paints blend on watercolor paper. So I'm going to create another gradient panel much like the last one that I created with the pencils. I am using cherry red for this panel, and I'm going to create two different washes. I'm going to create a lighter wash and a darker wash. So for this lighter wash, I'm going to swatch that on a piece of scrap paper. It's a little bit too dark. So normally you would just use less pigment, but in this case I've already mixed it up. So I've added a little bit more water, and I'll swatch it again. It looks great. This is the color that I'm looking for. So that is my light wash, and I'm gonna go ahead and mix up a little bit more pigmented wash. It's going to be a little bit darker, and this is the color that I will drop in. So I'm going to go ahead and just lay this down on the paper. I am not using a wet on wet method. This watercolor paper is really nice heavy watercolor paper, and I'm using quite a bit of water and paint. So my paper is staying fairly wet, which means everything's going to blend really, really well. So I have that first layer of wash down. I'm going back in with my darker pigment, and I'm just laying a little bit down to create some interest. I'm going to go ahead and prep some pieces for a card. I have this die set. This is from the Stamp Market. It is called Heart and Hugs, and I'm going to cut two of these large hearts out of some Hero Arts cardstock. This is cranberry cardstock. It's 100 pound. So I'm going to cut this twice. I want two of these die cuts, and then for this little hugs die cut, I am going to cut this twice out of cranberry cardstock, and then I'll cut it one additional time out of this Hero Arts sand cardstock as well. Here's another fun way to use these Inktense pencils. I have 5 different ink pencils here. I used my swatch chart to choose 5 different pastel colors that go really well together, and I'm going to use these to create a front panel for a birthday card. So I'm using a couple of different sizes of scallop circles from this Sizzix Nesting Scallop Circles die set. I'll trace this smaller circle onto my watercolor panel so I have a reference for my inking. And I'm sort of going to make a pinwheel shape here. I want to slightly overlap each of these colors and allow the colors to blend on the edges. It'll add a little bit of softness to the front of this card, and as long as the paper is wet, the ink will blend really well. I'm creating my ink color directly on my mat by just scribbling a little bit on the mat and then adding water. I'll continue to add the ink around the circle until I have all 5 ink colors on my panel, making sure that I work quickly so that the ink will blend at the transition point for each color. I'm making sure that I don't go back to my clean water well with a dirty brush so that the ink colors are only blended at the edges. I'm using 140 pound hot press watercolor paper here so you can see that it is less grainy. Once this panel is dry, I can start on some stamping. I'm using the Waffle Flower Birthday Kitties combo. This is a stamp and die set, and I'll use this little kitty holding the 2 birthday balloons. So I'm going to line up my stamp inside the scallop circle. I want to make sure I have enough space for the image and the greeting. And next I will stamp this in my MISTI on some layering weight white cardstock. I am going to use Ranger Archival ink in Shadow Gray. It's a nice light color that doesn't show through too much through the inking. It's also permanent ink, so it won't smear when I start to add color. And I'll only stamp this once. That should be enough of an outline for me to be able to follow that for my coloring. I'm going direct to paper with my pencils and then activating with water. I'm controlling the intensity of color by the amount of ink that I'm putting down on paper, and in very small spaces like the party hat, I'm just picking up some color from the tip of my pencil by lightly brushing the wet brush over the ink on the pencil. I like to dry off the pencils after doing this so I don't damage them. For the balloons, I'm creating a gradient of color by adding more intense and darker pigment on the left-hand side of the balloon, a little bit lighter as a transition area, and then pulling all of that out with a nice wash of water. It's always a good idea to have a piece of paper nearby so that you can swatch colors as you're working. The dipped end of the pencil represents a mid-wash of color for that pencil. The point of the pencil should be the darkest value of that color. A really good swatch chart should have darkest value to lightest wash represented. For my cat birthday card, I'm going to create a shaped card. So I'll start by die cutting this little cat, and then I will use one of the larger scallop circles to create a card base using this Hero Arts lapis cardstock. I folded my card base and I'm taping the scallop die onto the front of the top edge of the circle slightly above the fold. So this area won't cut, and this will create the hinge for my card base. Next, I'm using that next smaller scallop circle to die cut my inked front panel. After I cut this piece, I will place it in my MISTI and align the die cut cat and my greeting. I'm using the Today Has You All Over It stamp from the Spellbinders It's Party Time stamp set. And I'll use VersaFine Clair in Nocturne for the greeting. It's a nice, dark, rich black ink that will really stand out on the front of the card. I wanted to create an inside panel for this card, so I used that same size scalloped circle die that I used for the front panel to cut an inside panel from white layering weight cardstock. I am using Distress Oxide ink in Mermaid Lagoon to stamp some party hats and some birthday gifts on this panel. These stamps are also from the Waffle Flower Birthday Kitties combo stamp set. I decided to take this card up a notch, so I'm applying some glossy accents to the two birthday party balloons. I'll need to give this just a second to dry, and then this card is ready to assemble. Back to my rose card. I've fussy cut my rose, and I am selecting a greeting. I am using the Celebrate Your Big Day greeting stamps from Altenews Gerbera Revolution. I am stamping these in Altenews Grapevine pigment ink, and I'm going to stamp these in 2 stages. Sometimes when I am stamping a large greeting stamp with a smaller sentiment strip stamp, it's hard to align them to get the two stamps close enough to get the look that I'm looking for. So what I will do in this instance is stamp the larger stamp first, and then go back and align the smaller sentiment strip where I want it, and then stamp that as a separate step. I like how this greeting looks, so I am going to die cut it. I'm using one of the smaller ornate frame dies from this die set. I got this die set from my son for Christmas. And then I'm going to use one of these larger frame dies from the set to cut this front panel. I'm using a ruler to mark the center of this die cut, and then I will line up this border die from the Spellbinders Stacked Decorative Edges die set to cut a decorative edge on each of the halves of this piece. I have all of the elements for my rose card, so I'm going to start to assemble this card. I am using an A2 card base. This is Hero Arts Dove White cardstock. It's a 100-pound cardstock, so it's a nice weight for card bases. And I decided to split that ornate frame die and create sort of a vase look on the front of my card. So I am going to adhere the inked rose with some foam squares. I snipped off those lower leaves on the rose so I could position them in a different place on the front panel. And I've also used a light colored pencil to very lightly go around the outside of this die cut. It really helps to do that when you're fussy cutting. For the greeting, I'm using a combination of both foam squares and a liquid adhesive to ensure that the greeting is supported in the mail and it doesn't get crushed. It does stand up a little bit higher on the front of the card. Here's the completed card. I think it would be really nice for Mother's Day. Moving on to the hugs card. Here's how I assembled that card. I have my 3 hugs die cuts, and I'm creating a bit of a shadow layer with the craft cardstock. So I'm using that as my bottom layer, and then I'm using a liquid adhesive to stack the 2 red layers on top of that craft layer. Now I can start to assemble the panels. So I'm just using liquid adhesive to adhere the watercolor panel to the red panel. The sizes of these 2 panels, the watercolor panel is 4 by 5 1/4. The red panel is 4 1/8 by 5 3/8, so just slightly larger. There's a 1/16 of an inch on each side. And then I will adhere these 2 panels to the card base. The cardstock that I'm using here for the card base is Hero Arts. The color is Sand. It's a 100-pound cardstock. And next I'm going to stack these 2 heart die cuts slightly offset to give a little more visual interest to the front of the card. And then finally, I will use some liquid adhesive and a couple of very small snips of foam squares to adhere my hugs greeting. I might add some metallic heart sequins to the front of this card as well. I like to come back and look at things after a day or so to see if there's anything that I want to tweak. Okay, on to the Mardi Gras card. I'm using Hero Arts Hero Hues cardstock in Eggplant for the card base. This is an A2 card. My stenciled front panel is a 6 by 6, so I'm going to trim that down in my tonic trimmer. I want a 1/16 of an inch of my card base to show on each side, so I'm trimming this front panel down to 4 1/8 by 5 3/8. And I realized during editing that I glued my mask on upside down with the back facing out. I was able to pull those feathers off and flip that around, so that was a good save. I am adhering the Celebrate greeting with some foam squares and liquid adhesive. This greeting is from Pretty Pink Posh. It's from the Birthday Sentiment Stamps and Dies set. And that is all that I need to do for the outside. I did create an inside panel for this card, so those streamers and confetti you see there are from the Hero Arts Cheeky Birthday Stamp and Die set. So I just need to adhere this front panel onto my card base. I'm doing that with just some liquid adhesive. It needs to be repositioned here. I didn't have it exactly centered, but this card is complete. On to assembling the shaped cat birthday card. I will stack these two cat die cuts with some liquid adhesive and adhere that to the front panel on the card. And then I'm going to use some foam tape to bump up this front panel a little bit, just give the card a little bit more interest. It's kind of flat. And once that is adhered, I can glue in my inside panel where I will write a little note to the recipient. And this card is also complete. Okay, I have a quick bonus card here. I had one of these watercolor panels left over and I'm using the All-to-New Wavy Outlines die set. I've been wanting to use this set for a while and this is a perfect use for these die cuts. I used the larger stitched rectangle from Gina K's Master Layouts 2 to create a stitched border on my inked panel, and then I'll use foam tape to adhere this panel to a Hero Arts A2 card base. This is peony cardstock, 100 pound. And this little XOXO die cut is also from the Stamp Market. It's from that Heart and Hugs die set. I cut that from another watercolor panel. I stacked two of those and then heat embossed that with Wow White Pearl Superfine Embossing Powder. This is a new embossing powder that I just purchased. I love the pearlescent look. I'll finish off this card with a couple of water drop embellishments on the front, and this card is complete. Thanks so much for watching. Be sure to check out my upcoming video on different types of paper and how they react with all of these Inktense products. See you in the next video.